If you ever hear a dog barking where no dog should be, don't walk away. The voice of Sergeant Ethan Cole cut through the thin veil of rain as he stood alone beneath the flickering glow of a streetlight on the edge of downtown Portland, Oregon, where midnight traffic had faded into a distant hum and the city seemed to hold its breath under a steady cold drizzle. Water slid down cracked sidewalks, collecting in shallow streams that reflected neon signs like broken pieces of a memory. Ethan adjusted the collar of his damp jacket, the weight of years in uniform still shaping the way he stood, alert even in silence, even when nothing on paper said there was a reason to be. He had served long enough to trust patterns most people never noticed, and yet tonight felt different, as if the city itself was speaking in a language only he could barely understand. It started as a sound too faint to be real, carried upward through the iron grates beneath his boots, a distant, uneven bark that didn't belong to the streets above. He paused mid-step, breath slowing, eyes narrowing toward the storm drain running along the curb. At first, he told himself it was echo distortion, the wind playing tricks through metal tunnels underground. But then it came again, sharper this time, not random but intentional, like something trying to be heard rather than simply making noise. Ethan exhaled slowly, scanning the empty intersection, then stepped closer to the curb and lowered himself slightly, listening. The bark echoed again, and this time it carried something more than sound. It carried urgency. A memory flickered behind his eyes without permission, a training yard far from Portland, dust instead of rain, and a German shepherd running drills beside him, always precise, always steady, always alive in a way that felt unbreakable. That memory tightened something in his chest as he reached for his flashlight and angled its beam toward the drain. The light cut through the metal grid, revealing darkness beneath like an open throat swallowing everything it touched. "Hey," he said quietly, not as a command, but as a signal, as if whatever was down there might understand tone more than language. The barking answered him immediately, closer now, echoing off wet concrete walls. Ethan's posture shifted. This was no stray wandering through tunnels. This was focused, deliberate, alive. A second sound followed, weaker, almost strained, but still holding on, and that was when he noticed it. The rhythm wasn't chaotic. It was patterned, consistent, like communication. He stepped back just enough to assess the drain structure. Heavy iron grate bolted into place, old but reinforced, likely installed decades ago to handle floodwater surges from seasonal storms. Tonight, however, the rain was pushing the system to its limits, water rushing beneath in restless motion. Ethan knelt, placing a gloved hand on the metal surface, feeling a faint vibration travel through it. "Hold on," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure to whom he was speaking. Without hesitation, he reached for his radio but stopped. This wasn't yet a situation for escalation, not until he understood what was down there. Instead, he scanned the sidewalk until he found what he needed, a utility hook resting near a maintenance box, likely left behind by city workers earlier in the day. He returned to the drain, wedging the tool into the edge of the grate. The barking grew louder for a brief moment, as if reacting to his presence, as if recognizing that something was finally responding. Ethan applied steady pressure, muscles tightening as rain soaked through his sleeves. The metal resisted, groaning faintly, but slowly, inch by inch, it began to shift. A rush of colder air escaped from the opening beneath, carrying the scent of wet earth and stone. Ethan paused, listening again. The barking had changed now, less sharp, more strained, but still present. "I hear you," he said softly, almost instinctively, like speaking to someone trapped in a place they couldn't see their way out of. With a final push, the grate loosened enough to create a narrow opening, and Ethan immediately angled his flashlight downward. The beam revealed rushing water below, swirling through a narrow concrete channel that disappeared into darkness. But for a brief second, something moved within it, a shape, barely visible, clinging close to the edge of the flow. His breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition of urgency. Whatever was down there wasn't part of the city's rhythm. It was fighting against it. Ethan shifted his stance, lowering himself closer to the opening, rain dripping from the brim of his hood as he focused completely on the sound, now echoing from below. The bark came again, weaker but unwavering, and Ethan made a decision without saying it aloud. There was no hesitation left in him now, only purpose shaped by instinct and something deeper that didn't need explanation. He secured his footing against the curb, tightened his grip on the edge of the drain, and prepared to descend into the darkness where the sound refused to fade. The rain had grown heavier in the minutes since he first heard the sound, turning the street into a shimmering blur of reflected headlights and trembling neon. Sergeant Ethan Cole tightened his grip on the edge of the storm drain and lowered himself slowly, boots searching for traction against the narrow concrete lip. The metal opening creaked softly under his weight, but held firm as he carefully shifted his body downward, one controlled movement at a time. Cold air rose from below like breath from another world, damp and sharp, carrying the scent of wet stone and rushing water. His flashlight cut through the darkness in steady arcs, revealing a tight channel beneath the city where water moved fast but not uncontrollably, guided by the structure of old engineering and time-worn concrete. The barking came again, closer now, echoing off the curved walls beneath the street above, and Ethan felt that strange certainty settle deeper in his chest, the kind that did not come from logic but from recognition. He had heard that sound before, not in this place, not in this moment, but in a life where trust was built between man and animal under conditions most people never saw. "Easy," he said quietly, more to himself than anything else, as he descended the last step and finally stood inside the drainage channel. The water reached just above his boots, cold but manageable, moving quickly past his ankles as he followed the direction of the sound. The beam of his flashlight swept forward, revealing narrow alcoves carved into the sides of the tunnel, places where debris collected and where something small could easily become hidden from the world above. The barking shifted again, and this time it carried a tone that felt less like warning and more like guidance, as if whatever was down here understood he was close. Ethan moved carefully along the edge of the channel, keeping one hand against the damp wall for balance. The space narrowed slightly ahead, and the sound grew stronger until it seemed to come from directly beyond a bend where the tunnel curved out of sight. He paused there, lowering the flashlight just enough to avoid glare on the wet surface, and listened. For a moment, there was only water and echo, but then the bark returned, followed by a softer sound, almost like a response, and Ethan felt his breathing slow as he stepped forward into the curve. What the light revealed made him stop completely. The tunnel widened slightly here, forming a small pocket where water slowed before continuing downstream. And in that pocket, partially supported by a raised ledge of concrete, was a German Shepherd. The dog was not alone in presence but in position, standing steady despite exhaustion, its coat darkened by rain and spray, its amber eyes locked immediately onto Ethan's light. There was no aggression, no fear directed outward, only focus, as if the animal had been waiting for this exact moment. Ethan crouched instinctively, lowering his center of gravity so as not to appear threatening. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice carrying just above the sound of water. The German Shepherd responded with a single bark, sharp and controlled, then shifted slightly to the side, revealing what it had been shielding. Ethan angled his flashlight carefully, and what he saw tightened his focus even further. Nestled against the curve of the concrete was a small bundle of fabric, damp but deliberately arranged, and within it were two very young puppies, barely able to hold themselves steady, pressed close together for warmth. The German Shepherd stood between them and the flowing water, adjusting its stance every few seconds to keep them secure against the current that brushed past the ledge. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling into something deeper than surprise. "You have been down here protecting them," he said quietly, as if confirming what the scene had already told him. The dog did not move away. Instead, it took one careful step closer to Ethan, then paused, watching him with an intensity that felt almost measured, almost as if evaluating whether he was there to help or interrupt. Ethan shifted his flashlight lower, setting it on the concrete ledge so the light would not be blinding, and extended one hand slowly, palm open. The German Shepherd hesitated, then lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The barking stopped. Only the sound of water remained, steady and constant, filling the narrow underground space. Ethan looked at the puppies again, noting the way they were pressed tightly together, their small movements responding to the presence of their guardian. Without wasting another second, he carefully removed his outer jacket, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, and placed it beside the ledge, creating a dry surface above the waterline. He spoke softly throughout, not to command but to reassure, words carried in a calm rhythm that matched his training and instinct. The German Shepherd watched every motion, remaining still but alert, as if understanding that change was approaching but unsure of its nature. Ethan reached toward the puppies first, checking their position, then gently adjusted the fabric around them to ensure they were secure before attempting to lift them. The mother dog stepped closer, close enough now that Ethan could feel the subtle tension in her posture, not resistance, but readiness. "I have them," he said quietly, almost a promise rather than a statement. And for the first time since he had entered the storm drain, the German Shepherd lowered itself slightly beside him, no longer standing guard alone. The underground tunnel felt smaller now, not because its walls had changed, but because everything inside it had become heavier with awareness. Sergeant Ethan Cole remained kneeling beside the raised concrete ledge, his flashlight now resting where he had placed it earlier, casting a steady pale beam across the shallow pocket where the German Shepherd stood watch. The puppies were still nestled inside his jacket, their tiny movements subtle but present, each breath a fragile reminder of why the moment mattered so much. Ethan adjusted the fabric carefully once more, ensuring the edge was high enough to block the thin current of water flowing past the ledge. The German Shepherd watched every motion without blinking, as if memorizing each action, not out of suspicion but necessity, as though trust itself was something that had to be rebuilt one decision at a time. Ethan spoke softly again, his voice low and steady, not meant to command but to reassure. "You are safe now. I am going to get you all out of here." The dog shifted slightly, stepping closer until the distance between them narrowed to just a few feet. Up close, Ethan could see the exhaustion in its posture, the subtle tremor in its muscles that came not from fear but from endurance. This was not a stray surviving chance. This was protection held together by will alone. He slowly reached toward his radio clipped at his shoulder and pressed the transmit button. Static cracked softly before a calm voice responded from above ground. Ethan identified his location in measured terms, providing cross streets and confirming he was inside a drainage channel beneath the intersection. The response was immediate acknowledgement, followed by instructions to wait for assistance. Ethan released the button and exhaled slowly, eyes returning to the animals in front of him. Time felt different down here. Above ground, the city continued its rhythm of headlights and rain, but beneath the surface everything narrowed into a single purpose. The German Shepherd lowered itself beside the jacket slightly, positioning its body so that it remained between the flowing water and the puppies, even as Ethan prepared for extraction. He noticed how carefully it adjusted with each movement, always prioritizing the smallest shift in current or sound. "You have been doing this alone for a while," Ethan said quietly, not expecting an answer, only acknowledging the truth of what he saw. The dog did not respond with sound, only a brief glance toward the puppies, then back to Ethan. A faint echo of movement came from deeper within the tunnel, likely just shifting water, but it caused the German Shepherd to lift its head sharply, alert once again. Ethan followed its gaze instinctively, scanning the darkness beyond the bend, but nothing emerged. Still, the reaction revealed something important. The animal was not only protecting what was in front of it, but also monitoring everything around it continuously, as if danger could appear from any direction at any moment. Ethan repositioned himself slightly, placing his body between the open channel and the protected ledge, mirroring the instinct he recognized from years of field experience. Minutes passed slowly, marked only by the sound of water and the distant vibration of city life above. Then, faintly at first, a second set of footsteps echoed through the tunnel system, followed by the subtle flicker of light reflecting off damp walls. Backup had arrived. Ethan called out calmly, guiding them toward his position while maintaining his focus on the animals. A rescue team member appeared first at the curve of the tunnel, moving carefully through the shallow water, followed by another carrying a reinforced transport crate. The atmosphere shifted immediately as professional coordination replaced isolation, but Ethan did not step back. He remained where he was, ensuring the German Shepherd remained calm as new presence entered the space. The dog tensed briefly, then held still, watching each movement with controlled attention. Ethan raised a hand slightly toward the team, signaling for slow approach. "Do not rush," he said firmly but quietly. They trust movement more than words right now. The rescue team adjusted accordingly, lowering their pace and positioning themselves at a respectful distance. One of them carefully placed a waterproof blanket near the ledge while Ethan began guiding the transfer of the puppies with deliberate precision. The German Shepherd remained close, occasionally leaning in just enough to confirm the puppies were still within reach of safety. When the first puppy was carefully lifted into the transport crate, a soft sound escaped from the mother, not distress, but acknowledgement, as if accepting that help was finally present. Ethan paused for a moment, watching the interaction closely, recognizing something deeper than instinct at work. This was not separation. This was transition, guided by trust that had formed under pressure no one above would ever see. As the second puppy was secured safely, the German Shepherd stepped forward one final time, pressing its nose gently against Ethan's hand. The gesture was brief but deliberate, carrying the weight of exhaustion, relief, and recognition. For a moment, the underground tunnel felt less like a place of emergency and more like a passage between survival and something softer, something that resembled safety returning after being absent for too long. The moment the second puppy was secured inside the transport crate, the underground tunnel seemed to exhale in quiet relief, as if even the concrete walls recognized that something fragile had been carried back from the edge of loss into the possibility of safety. Sergeant Ethan Cole remained crouched near the ledge for a few seconds longer, his hand still resting on the damp fabric of his jacket where the German Shepherd had just pressed its nose in a final gesture of acknowledgement. The rescue team worked with steady precision beside him, securing straps on the crate and checking airflow, but Ethan's attention stayed on the animal that had not moved far. The German Shepherd stood just a few feet away now, watching every adjustment, every careful motion, as if confirming that the mission beneath the city had not ended in confusion or separation. The rain above continued to fall, its distant rhythm faintly audible through the drainage system. But down here, everything felt contained, focused, and unusually still. Ethan slowly rose from his crouch, joints stiff from the cold water and confined space, and signaled the team to prepare for movement. The exit would require coordination, careful lifting through the narrow access point, and controlled handling of both the animals and equipment. One of the rescue personnel secured the first crate and began guiding it toward the ladder that led upward, while another prepared a harness system to assist Ethan in climbing out with stability. Ethan glanced once more at the German Shepherd before speaking softly. "We are going to take you out of here now." The dog did not resist. Instead, it took a single step forward, aligning itself closer to the group, but still maintaining a protective position relative to the empty space where the puppies had been moments earlier. As Ethan moved toward the ladder, he noticed the way the dog tracked each motion of the crate being lifted. There was no panic, only vigilance, as if it understood that its role was shifting but not ending. The first crate disappeared upward through the narrow opening, followed by a brief pause as the team above confirmed secure transfer. Ethan placed one hand on the ladder and began ascending carefully, boots scraping lightly against the wet metal rungs. Behind him, the German Shepherd followed the movement with its gaze until the last possible angle of sight was lost, then lowered its head slightly, remaining still in the shallow water. When Ethan reached the surface, cold air struck him immediately, carrying the scent of rain, asphalt, and distant city lights. The opening of the storm drain was surrounded by a small emergency perimeter, with 2 additional responders assisting in guiding equipment away from the curb. Ethan stepped aside and immediately turned back toward the opening, signaling for the second crate to be brought up. As it emerged, he could hear faint movement inside, subtle but steady, and the confirmation from the team that both puppies were stable. A sense of quiet relief passed through the group, not expressed loudly, but present in the way shoulders eased and movement slowed. Ethan then looked back toward the opening once more. For a brief moment, there was only darkness beneath the street, but then movement appeared again. The German Shepherd was coming up. It climbed slowly, assisted carefully by one of the responders who guided its ascent with a supportive harness. Each step was deliberate, water dripping from its coat as it emerged from the tunnel into the night air. When it finally reached the surface, it paused, blinking against the brightness of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. Ethan stepped closer instinctively, maintaining calm presence. The dog did not retreat. Instead, it stood still, scanning the surroundings before turning its attention toward the crates where the puppies were now safely contained. A low, soft sound left it, not a bark, but something quieter, almost like recognition of distance no longer being dangerous. Ethan crouched again, this time on the street level, and extended a steady hand. The German Shepherd approached slowly and stopped just within reach. For a moment, neither moved. The rain continued to fall around them, but it no longer carried urgency, only rhythm. Ethan placed his hand gently against the dog's shoulder, feeling the exhaustion beneath its wet coat, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "You did not leave them. Not once." The dog remained still, eyes fixed forward, then lowered its head slightly, allowing the contact to hold. Around them, the rescue team finalized preparations for transport to a nearby veterinary facility approximately 6 miles away, where the puppies would receive immediate care. The streetlights reflected off puddles as the group prepared to move, but Ethan stayed where he was for a moment longer, looking at the dog that had refused to abandon what mattered most even in complete isolation. The German Shepherd finally shifted its weight, standing beside him rather than in front of him, as if choosing alignment rather than separation. And as the vehicles prepared to leave, there was a quiet understanding between them that what had happened beneath the city was not only a rescue from water and darkness, but something far deeper, carried out in silence, patience, and a loyalty that did not require language to be understood. The rain had softened into a steady mist by the time the convoy of rescue vehicles left the intersection above the storm drain, their red and white lights reflecting across the wet streets like fragments of a fading storm. Sergeant Ethan Cole stood near the rear vehicle for a moment longer, watching as the transport crate containing the puppies was carefully secured inside with padded restraints. The German Shepherd remained close beside him, now dry only in presence, its coat still damp from the underground channel, eyes tracking every movement of the crate as if refusing to lose sight of what it had protected for so long. Ethan placed one hand lightly on the side of the transport vehicle, steadying himself as fatigue finally settled into his shoulders, not from exhaustion alone, but from the emotional weight of what had unfolded beneath the city. A veterinarian from the emergency response unit approached, confirming that the puppies were stable and would be transported immediately to a nearby animal care facility approximately 8 miles away for monitoring and recovery. Ethan nodded without speaking, his attention still partially anchored to the dog beside him. The German Shepherd had not moved away since emerging from the tunnel. It stood with quiet stillness, no longer in survival mode, but not yet fully released from responsibility either. The streetlights above cast long reflections across the wet pavement, and in that soft glow Ethan noticed something subtle in the dog's posture, a shift from tension to uncertainty, as if it was only now realizing that the role it had carried alone was no longer required. Ethan crouched slightly, lowering himself to eye level again, his voice calm and steady. "They are safe now. You did what they needed you to do." The dog looked at him briefly, then turned its gaze toward the direction the transport vehicle had gone, as if confirming the truth of those words through distance rather than sound. For several seconds, there was only the sound of tires rolling through wet streets and the faint hum of emergency radios fading into the night. Ethan slowly exhaled, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, then turned his body slightly to shield the dog from passing wind. The veterinarian returned with a clipboard, speaking quietly about follow-up care, hydration protocols, and observation windows, but Ethan only absorbed fragments of the information, his focus remaining on the living presence beside him. The German Shepherd finally shifted its weight and took a small step forward, not toward the vehicles, but toward Ethan himself. It stopped within arm's reach, then lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in a gesture that felt like release. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before placing a steady hand along the side of its neck, feeling the warmth beneath damp fur, the subtle rise and fall of breath that had not stopped even in the most confined and uncertain moments underground. "You were not alone down there," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to a memory as much as the animal in front of him. The dog remained still, accepting the contact without resistance, its eyes half focused on him, half somewhere farther away, as if replaying every second of what had just ended. In the distance, the convoy turned onto the main road, disappearing into the rhythm of the city, leaving only the quiet intersection behind. The storm had passed completely now, replaced by a cool night breeze that carried the scent of wet asphalt and distant pine from the outskirts of Portland. Ethan finally stood, releasing his hand from the dog, but not stepping away. There was a moment of silence between them, not empty, but full of understanding that did not require continuation. The German Shepherd looked once more toward the direction of the vehicles, then back to Ethan, and for the first time since the rescue began, its posture softened fully, shoulders lowering, tension leaving its frame in small invisible increments. Ethan gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them. "Let us get you somewhere warm," he said calmly. The dog followed without hesitation as he walked toward the support vehicle waiting nearby. The night around them had quieted completely, and what remained was not urgency or uncertainty, but the slow return of order after chaos, carried forward by breath, by trust, and by the silent understanding that even in the deepest places beneath a city, something still chooses to protect what matters most. The drive to the veterinary facility took less than 10 minutes, but in that short stretch of time the world outside. The vehicle felt strangely different, as if everything had slowed down just enough to allow thought to settle where chaos had once been. Sergeant Ethan Cole sat in the front passenger seat while the German Shepherd rested in the rear compartment, separated by a clear divider that allowed visibility but maintained safety for both. The interior of the vehicle was softly lit, casting muted reflections across the glass as streetlights passed in steady intervals outside. Ethan occasionally turned his head to check on the dog, noting how it remained seated but alert, eyes following every movement of the road, as if still processing the transition from underground darkness to surface reality. The veterinarian accompanying them reviewed notes on a handheld tablet, speaking in a calm and measured tone about initial evaluations, hydration status, and observation procedures for both the puppies and the adult dog. Ethan listened in fragments, his focus shifting between the road ahead and the quiet presence behind him. When they arrived at the facility, the exterior lights of the clinic glowed warmly against the night, a contrast to the cold mist that still lingered over Portland. The entrance doors opened immediately as staff prepared for intake, and the transport crate containing the puppies was carefully removed and carried inside with controlled urgency, but gentle handling. Ethan stepped out of the vehicle and followed closely, while the German Shepherd was guided out on a secure leash held by one of the veterinary technicians. The dog hesitated for only a brief moment at the threshold, then moved forward without resistance, staying close to Ethan's side as they entered the facility. Inside, the environment shifted into quiet efficiency, with clean surfaces, soft lighting, and the steady sound of medical equipment in the background. The puppies were taken into an examination room where a team immediately began assessment, while Ethan and the German Shepherd were directed toward a separate observation area. For the first time since the rescue, there was no rushing water, no echoing tunnel, no sense of immediate danger. Instead, there was controlled stillness, the kind that follows survival but has not yet fully become peace. Ethan stood near a glass partition, watching as one of the veterinary staff gently checked the puppy's condition, confirming stable breathing and responsiveness. A subtle relief passed through his posture, though he did not speak it aloud. The German Shepherd sat beside him, its attention fixed on the same room, ears occasionally twitching at the faint sounds of movement inside. A veterinary technician approached with a bowl of water, placing it near the dog and speaking softly in reassurance. The dog lowered its head slightly and drank carefully, not with urgency, but with measured acceptance, as if acknowledging that the immediate need to protect had been temporarily replaced by the need to recover. Ethan exhaled slowly, resting one hand against the edge of the counter. "They're going to be okay," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The technician nodded in confirmation, explaining that while the first 24 hours would be critical for monitoring, all early signs were positive. Ethan looked through the glass again, watching the smallest movements of the puppies as they were gently wrapped in warm blankets and placed under controlled heat lamps. The German Shepherd rose slightly from its seated position, stepping closer to the glass partition, its gaze unwavering. There was no distress in its expression now, only focus, as if confirming that what it had fought for beneath the city had not been lost after all. Ethan placed a steady hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the tension there gradually ease. "You held on longer than anyone should have had to," he said quietly, his voice carrying a calm respect rather than instruction. The dog remained still, accepting the contact, its breathing steadying in rhythm with the quiet hum of the facility around them. For several minutes, neither moved, both standing in the shared silence of aftermath. Outside, the rain had fully stopped, leaving only wet streets and reflected light from passing cars. Inside, the veterinary team continued their work with careful precision, documenting progress and preparing next steps for recovery. Ethan finally stepped back from the glass, signaling that there was nothing more immediate he could do. The German Shepherd followed his movement, then paused, looking once more at the room where the puppies rested before turning its attention back to him. In that moment, there was no urgency left in its posture, only presence. Ethan nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had led them here, and together they stood in the soft glow of the veterinary facility, where the night no longer felt like survival, but like the beginning of something slowly becoming whole again. The early hours of the morning settled gently over the veterinary facility, replacing the chaos of the night with a quiet rhythm of controlled movement and soft lighting. Sergeant Ethan Cole remained seated in a waiting area just outside the observation corridor, his posture steady but reflective, hands loosely clasped as he watched through the glass partition where the medical team continued their careful monitoring of the puppies. The German Shepherd lay on a padded mat nearby, no longer restrained, but still choosing to stay close to him rather than wandering deeper into the unfamiliar environment. Its breathing had slowed compared to earlier, the tension in its frame gradually dissolving into something closer to rest, though its eyes still occasionally shifted toward the treatment room, as if confirming the ongoing safety of what had been recovered. Inside the treatment area, the veterinary staff worked with quiet precision, adjusting warm blankets and monitoring vital signs displayed on softly glowing equipment. Ethan observed without interruption, noting how the smallest movements inside the room seemed to carry meaning now, not urgency, but continuation. The veterinarian who had accompanied them earlier approached and took a seat beside him, speaking in a calm voice about expected recovery timelines, nutritional support, and the importance of uninterrupted rest over the next several hours. Ethan nodded occasionally, absorbing the information while his attention drifted between the conversation and the still image of the German Shepherd resting near his side. After a moment, he spoke quietly, asking about the likelihood of long-term placement options once recovery was complete. The veterinarian explained that social behavior would be evaluated over the coming days, but early indicators suggested strong adaptability and trust response, especially given the circumstances of rescue. Ethan looked toward the dog when he heard this, noticing how it had now lowered its head fully onto its front paws, no longer scanning every corner of the room, but remaining aware in a calmer, more grounded way. Time passed in measured silence, marked only by the soft hum of equipment and the occasional movement of staff through the corridor. Eventually, one of the technicians exited the treatment room and approached Ethan, offering a brief update that both puppies were stable, responsive, and showing early signs of improved regulation after warming and hydration support. The words carried a quiet reassurance that settled deeply into the space between exhaustion and relief. Ethan stood slowly, walking closer to the glass to observe the puppies himself. They were now resting under controlled heat lamps, their small forms no longer trembling, their movements minimal but steady. The German Shepherd rose as well and followed him at a short distance, stopping beside him again as they both looked in silence through the glass. There was no sound between them, only shared attention directed toward the fragile lives that had been brought back from beneath the city. Ethan placed one hand gently against the glass, not as a gesture of separation, but of acknowledgement. "You kept them alive," he said quietly, his voice almost absorbed by the quiet room. The German Shepherd remained still, then shifted slightly closer until its shoulder lightly touched his leg. It was not seeking command or direction, only proximity. The veterinarian observed from a distance but did not interrupt, allowing the moment to exist without structure or instruction. Outside the facility, the sky had begun to lighten faintly, the first trace of morning forming above the horizon in a soft gradient of gray and pale blue. Inside, the atmosphere remained unchanged in tone but transformed in meaning. What had begun beneath concrete and water now existed in controlled light and steady breath, no longer defined by urgency, but by continuation. Ethan eventually stepped back from the glass, exhaling slowly as he returned to his seat. The German Shepherd followed and lay down again beside him, this time with less hesitation, settling into the space as if accepting that the immediate need for vigilance had shifted into something quieter. The sound of distant city traffic began to grow faintly stronger as morning approached, but inside the facility everything remained still, anchored in recovery, presence, and the unspoken understanding that survival was no longer the question, only what came after it. Morning light finally broke through the thin layer of cloud cover above Portland, casting a soft gray-gold glow across the streets outside the veterinary facility. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted into a calm rhythm of monitored recovery and quiet movement. The kind of stillness that only arrives after a long night has fully released its grip. Sergeant Ethan Cole stood near the observation glass once again, his posture relaxed but attentive, hands resting loosely at his sides as he watched the treatment room where the puppies now rested under steady care. The German Shepherd lay beside him on the padded floor, no longer tense or scanning, but present in a quieter way, its breathing slow and even, as if finally allowing itself to exist without the need to constantly anticipate danger. Inside the room beyond the glass, the veterinary team continued routine checks, documenting stable readings and carefully adjusting warm blankets. The puppies were no longer fighting for warmth or breath. Instead, they lay in a controlled environment where every variable had been adjusted towards safety. Ethan observed this without speaking for a long moment, allowing the weight of the previous night to settle into something softer, something that no longer demanded immediate action. A technician approached quietly and informed him that both puppies had passed the most critical window and were now responding normally to feeding support. The words were simple, but they carried a depth that seemed to shift the air itself. Ethan gave a slow nod, his gaze remaining fixed on the small forms beyond the glass. The German Shepherd beside him lifted its head slightly at the sound of movement, then settled again when it recognized there was no threat present. For the first time since the rescue, the dog did not immediately check every corner of the room or track every passing sound. Instead, it remained close to Ethan, as if choosing stillness over vigilance, presence over preparation. The veterinarian who had been overseeing the case joined them briefly, explaining that the next phase would involve observation over the coming days, followed by evaluation for long-term placement or reunification possibilities depending on environmental suitability. Ethan listened carefully, then asked a quiet question about whether the adult dog would be allowed to remain nearby during recovery. The answer was affirmative, provided behavior remained stable, and Ethan felt a subtle sense of confirmation settle within him. He looked down at the German Shepherd as the veterinarian moved away, noticing how the dog had now shifted slightly closer to the glass, watching the puppies with steady focus. There was no distress in its posture anymore, only attention, as if ensuring that what it had fought to preserve was still real and intact. Ethan stepped forward slowly until he stood directly beside it, then lowered himself to one knee so they were at the same level. "They are still here," he said quietly, his voice steady and calm. The dog did not respond verbally, but its gaze remained fixed on the room, as if acknowledging the truth without needing confirmation. Outside, the morning continued to brighten, light spreading across the wet streets and reflecting softly through the facility windows. The sounds of the city gradually returned, distant traffic, early movement, the faint rhythm of a world restarting after night. Inside, however, time remained measured and slow, defined not by urgency, but by recovery. Ethan stayed there for several minutes, simply observing alongside the dog, neither of them moving away from the glass. The puppies occasionally shifted under the warm lamps, small signs of life that now carried reassurance instead of uncertainty. Eventually, Ethan stood again, exhaling softly as he placed one hand gently on the dog's shoulder. The German Shepherd leaned into the contact slightly, not seeking direction, but accepting presence. There was no longer any need for action in that moment, only continuity. The veterinarian returned once more with final notes for the morning, confirming that both puppies were stable and expected to continue improving under supervision. Ethan acknowledged the update with a brief nod, then turned his attention back to the glass one last time before stepping away. The German Shepherd followed him without hesitation, staying close as they moved toward the seating area near the exit. As they settled there, the facility doors opened briefly to let in a cool breeze from outside, carrying the faint scent of morning rain and fresh pavement. Ethan looked out toward the light beyond the glass doors, then back to the dog resting quietly beside him. In that quiet space between night and day, there was no longer a rescue unfolding, only the aftermath of one, where survival had already been secured and what remained was simply the slow, steady return of peace. By the time afternoon settled fully over Portland, the veterinary facility had taken on a quieter rhythm, the kind that follows a long night of uncertainty finally resolved into monitored calm. Sunlight filtered through the tall glass panels near the entrance, scattering soft reflections across the polished floor and warming the otherwise sterile environment with a gentle gold tone. Sergeant Ethan Cole remained seated in the same waiting area, though his posture had changed over the past hours from alert readiness to a more grounded stillness. His hands rested loosely together, and his gaze occasionally shifted toward the glass corridor where the puppies continued their recovery under careful supervision. The German Shepherd lay nearby on the floor, no longer tense or reactive, but fully settled now, its breathing steady and even, as if the weight it had carried for so long had finally been set down without resistance. Inside the treatment area, the veterinary team moved with quiet efficiency, performing routine checks and documenting stable readings. The puppies, once fragile and uncertain, now showed consistent improvement under warm lighting and controlled care. Their small movements were no longer signs of distress, but indications of gradual recovery. Ethan observed this without interruption, his attention no longer driven by urgency, but by a calm awareness that what had begun beneath the city had reached a point of stability. A veterinarian approached him once more, this time carrying finalized morning reports. The update was clear and steady. Both puppies were responding well to treatment. Feeding was successful, and no immediate complications were present. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the information without needing further explanation. There was a brief pause before he spoke, asking about the next steps for long-term care coordination. The veterinarian explained that once recovery reached a certain threshold, placement options would be evaluated, including potential reunification or adoption pathways, depending on the circumstances. Ethan listened carefully, then turned his attention briefly toward the German Shepherd beside him. The dog had lifted its head slightly at the sound of movement, but remained calm, showing no signs of stress or urgency. Instead, it appeared to be resting in awareness rather than vigilance, as if it had finally accepted that its responsibility in the immediate crisis was complete. Ethan stood slowly, stepping closer to the glass partition once again. Beyond it, the puppies were now resting more naturally, their breathing even and their bodies no longer reacting to every external stimulus. The soft hum of medical equipment provided a steady background rhythm, reinforcing the sense of controlled safety that now defined the space. He placed one hand lightly against the glass, not as a gesture of separation, but as acknowledgement of presence on the other side. "You are both going to be all right," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady, almost blending into the ambient sound of the room. The German Shepherd rose slowly and approached him, stopping just beside his leg. There was no hesitation in its movement, only quiet alignment, as if choosing proximity over distance without instruction. Ethan looked down at the dog for a moment, then gently rested his hand on its shoulder. The contact was steady, grounding, and without urgency. Outside the facility, the afternoon light had shifted into a softer angle, casting long reflections across the wet pavement from the earlier rain. The city had fully resumed its normal rhythm, unaware of the small sequence of events that had unfolded beneath its surface and carried through its recovery rooms. Inside, however, time still moved differently, measured not by urgency, but by resolution. The veterinarian returned to confirm that the puppies would remain under observation overnight, with continued monitoring scheduled through the following day. Ethan acknowledged the update with a simple nod, then turned away from the glass. The German Shepherd followed him without prompting, staying close as they moved toward the exit doors. As they reached the threshold, the automatic doors opened briefly, allowing a wave of cool air to enter, carrying the faint scent of rain-washed streets and distant traffic. Ethan paused there for a moment, looking outside at the softened light and the steady movement of the world beyond. Then he glanced back once more at the quiet interior of the facility, where recovery continued under careful hands. Beside him, the German Shepherd stood still, no longer looking back at the treatment room, but forward, aligned with his movement. In that final moment before stepping outside, there was no urgency left, no unfinished motion. Only a quiet understanding that what had been pulled from beneath the city had not only been rescued, but had also found the beginning of something stable enough to hold it beyond the night.